Good morning, my name is Baruch. I'm developer advocate with JFrog, and we do a lot of Grails. One of our products, BinTray, the whole UI is Grails, pretty neat stuff. So we have our own plugins. And today I'm going to talk with you about a fairly special topic about testing your plugins. And I'm quite surprised with a high amount of people that sit here. I kind of expected like 3 of you to be here. So thank you very much for coming. It's both morning and testing Grails plugins. So I appreciate that. We will see how it goes in terms of utilizing the whole 90 minutes. I won't try to waste your time if I will finish earlier. So we will see what we can do. We can talk about it, or you can just go and have your coffee that you will need somewhere down the road. One more thing. I have new Mac, and my whole experience with Mac is about 48 hours. So my muscle memory hurts, and I can hear it struggling. I need to stop my fingers from going places they're used to. So that might look a little bit rusty, but I hope we will manage. This is our agenda. I don't have any slides. All we want to do is write code and talk about it. I hope that's okay with you. We will see if that's okay with my fingers. Okay, let's start by discussing what plugin is. For my perspective, plugin is just kind of incomplete application packaged in a certain special way, right? So we might have plugins that only have services. They don't have the domain, they don't have controllers. We might have plugins that have controllers and pages, right? A plugin can introduce a special page, for example. So this kind of plugin we are going to talk about, and that's very interesting because we just discussed earlier that if you have Grails application, it can be modularized by plugins. You can have your modules packaged as plugins and then installed as plugins. That give you the whole microservices thing. Those microservices can actually be standalone plugins. And the plugin we are going to see here is this kind of plugin. This is a plugin that adds new functionality to your domain. We will see it has service, it has controller, it has a couple of pages, and you just mix it in your application, and you have some part of it implemented as a plugin. Okay? That sounds familiar and correct? Good. So now the question is, how do we test it? And there are a number of techniques of how to test your plugins. Each and every of them have their own drawbacks. Today I'm going to talk about one of them which has major drawback, and I will show you how we can overcome it, making it the perfect testing strategy from our perspective at least. What we are going to do, we are going to complete our plugin to be full testable Grails application. So in our example, we are going to add the needed dependencies that should exist in fully pledged Grails application. We will add Tomcat, we will add Hibernate, and then we will add some dummy model. And we will test our plugin as a standalone application with the unit tests, with the integration tests, with the functional tests to use our to test our UI. And the major problem with this approach, who knows what the major problem is? The problem is that you cannot test this plugin in another application because you test it as a standalone application. So you don't know how it will behave in a different Grails version, in different Java version, in different Groovy version, because you test it on some platform as your standalone application. So there are other techniques when you test your plugin installed inside another application. And those techniques don't have this drawback because you test them on their target platform and not on the dummy target platform that you created to complete your args. And the testing is more challenging then because you have this application lying around and making your testing more hard. So we will try to have the best of the both worlds. We will try to test our plugin as a standalone application, but with the ability to select target platform. So we will try to automate the deployment of our plugin in another application under any version of Grails, any version of Groovy, any version of Java. And then for me, it is the perfect testing strategy because you only test your plugin, but you can switch the target platform. Okay? That's the goal. What we're going to do now, we're going to take a plugin, complete it to be an application, write the full scope of the full suite of the test selection that we need to do. We'll write some unit tests, some integration tests, some functional tests, and then we are going to run this plugin on some target version of Grails. Okay? Any questions so far? You're okay with what we are going to try to do? Good. So let's do it. First, we need to add some domain because okay. So let's start. Before that, let's start by looking at the at our plugin and what we are trying to achieve. So here I have my plugin. This is normal Grails application. It doesn't have any domain because that's a plugin. It has a service. We're going to look at it very, very soon. It has utility class. We will look at that as well. And that's actually is. Here's our build config. In our build config, you can see that the only plugins are, the only dependencies are dependencies that I need and test, and the plugin that I need for my plugin. There are no usual Tomcat or Hibernate on this kind of stuff. And here is my descriptor of the plugin. This is my descriptor. Okay, it has all the needed information. The version, the target Grails version, title, author, description, documentation, etc., etc. Okay, so far. So this won't fly as a normal application. It misses the dependencies, mandatory dependencies. It misses a domain at least. So let's start and add those things. So in the domain, we are going to add some pretty basic domain. It will have two classes. Yes, sorry, it will be hard. All right. Okay. Name, this is it, and the other will be spaceship. Yeah, okay, so spaceship has the captain, name of the ship, type of the ship, and the captain, which is person. What our plugin is going to do, it's going to examine your domain, your application, after you install it, and show you a graph of your domain object in a separate page. So you'll have a special URL when you can go and see the graph of your domain objects. I don't know how useful it is. Probably it isn't, but that's the best demo world, the hello world I could think about for this talk, okay? So our demo our dummy domain that we are going to work is person and spaceship. I expect to see the hierarchy in my special pages. Okay, so here I have the controller and everything. Now I need to complete the missing dependencies. So I'm going to add them here. Oops, this is the wrong one. Yeah. Okay, so I add the REST client, I add Hibernate and Tomcat. This is what I need to complete my application. Okay, so let's clean up a bit. We talk about what plugin is. We talk about how we are going to test it. We are in the middle of completing it. We already added the domain classes. Whoa. What just happened? Yeah, okay. Okay, and we need to add a bootstrap script that will populate my database in order to play around and see what's going on. Yeah, it did it again. Okay. The bootstrap script is going to be inside conf. Inside conf, file, bootstrap groovy. All right. Yeah. So, yeah, this is it. So, this is my bootstrap groovy. Let's try to do that. And I have the init script, which creates a person with the name, saves it, creates a spaceship with the captain over here. Let's see the captain. Here is it, and saves it as well. Okay, so now I have something in the database to show. If I am not in error, this is all we need in order to try and run this stuff. Yep, let's try and run it. I need my terminal, this window please, and Grails run up. Okay. I was always amused by this compiling 27 sources, compiling 10 sources, compiling 125 sources, compiling 17 sources. What does that even mean? Oh, that was fast. Okay, let's open a new Firefox window and go to localhost testable. Okay, this is what should work. Yeah, okay. So I had my assets controller. Maybe it's the other one. Yeah, okay, sorry. So I have a person, have one person, no tree, and I have my spaceship. Spaceship, not this one, this one. Yeah, okay. So spaceship has the tree, so I have this arrow that I can go and see the person that is related to this spaceship. Ugly UI, dummy application. You will forgive me for that because that's not what's important. Okay, so I made a complete application out of my plugin, and it works. And now I can test my Grails application as I usually test my Grails application. So let's do some testing. Let's do some testing. Okay, so that was good. I added the missing dependencies and everything. Before we start with test, let's actually prepare it for packaging. When we are going to package this plugin, we need to turn off, to exclude all the things that we just added. we need to exclude the dependencies, and we need to exclude the domain classes. So let's do it. Okay, so I need my build config here, and for each and every added dependency, which are all those, I need to exclude them. Okay, export false, export false, export false. Okay, now they won't be included anymore. And I also need to exclude the domain from packaging, and I'm going to do that in testable Grails plugin here. So here I have a place to exclude from packaging. Exclude domain. So plugin excludes everything under the domain source root can be or JFrog Grails can be excluded. Okay, so now I actually back to square one in terms what my plugin jar will include, but I have fully testable stuff to play around. Okay, how that sounds? Questions so far? You follow my idea of how to do it? Okay, now we can actually start write some tests. So exclude the domain classes, we did all that. Now let's look at the unit tests. Okay, this will be our class, and we are going to put it at the unit test. Here are my tests. Okay. So I'm going to do 3 levels of unit testing. One of them will be pure unit test. No stubs, no mocks. I'm just going to test the functionality that know how to convert any domain object to this map that we are showing in our amazing screen. So what we are going to test is our util class, the domain's ID. This is the util class, and I need to Control Shift. Oh, okay, good. So yeah, this is our utility class. It has a static method, domain ID. It gets object and creates a map from it by putting a single name and the Grails ID, the ID in the database on the other side of this map. This is all it does. So this is very simple, and the good thing about it that for testing this functionality, I really don't need any stubs or any mocks or any Grails at all. This can be tested. It's a very pure level. So whatever can be tested without involving infrastructure should be tested without involving infrastructure, because in any other way, you will test your infrastructure with it, which is okay, but that's a whole different level of tests. Sometimes you don't have a choice. So when we're going to test our service, when we're going to test our controller, we won't have the choice to generate mocks and stubs and everything. But wherever we can leave it out, it's actually very advantageous. So this will be my pure unit test. Okay, so I have my spec, which extends specification, and I have the test itself. Okay, so again, this is very, very simple. ID domain, and then I expect I create some class which has ID with the ID, and then when I run this domain ID method, I expect to get a main with a simple class name on the other as the key, and its ID as a value, right? Just as expected. And another advantage of not having anything else to test is that I can run this test as a pure JUnit test, and it should be very, very fast. So just compiles Groovy. It won't run any Grails for me. It won't generate any stubs or mocks or whatever. And boom, it's very fast and easy. Right? That was the easy part. The thing is, we usually cannot do many of those tests because most of the things that we write in Grails are somehow connected to the infrastructure. We inject services. We expect this ID to appear in the domain classes which don't have this ID property, right? So if I'm looking at my person, it doesn't have the ID property at all. And that's because the ID property will be added by Grails. It will be the Hibernate ID, the database ID. So it's not here. I cannot test my utility class with person without involving some kind of infrastructure, mocking, stubbing, this addition of the ID. So that's what we are going to do next. So now we need to mock the domain object. We need the person class to grow this ID property for me. So let's test our Grails domain ID spec. Okay, it's still a unit test. It still doesn't check anything except of the utility class, but this time I need a mock. So where is my stub controller class? Yeah, here is it. Let's make it full screen. Okay, this is the class. No, sorry, that's not the correct one. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so now I have the same spec, but this time with a mixin. I use the mock annotation to let the framework know that I need a mock, a Grails domain mock for my person class. This will make it look as a domain object for my test, which is exactly what I want to achieve. This is my spec, and look what I have to do now. So I create my person with the name, and then I have to save it. Why do I have to save it? No, I need to save it to get an ID, right? I'm going to check the ID here. Before it's saved, the ID is null because this is Hibernate. Before you persist an object, the ID is null. But I want this ID because my domain ID is utility class. The one that I test need to validate this ID. So I save it. To validate, I do that. I try that after a save, I can actually find it. I also need this object to use the ID here. And now, that's the line when I'm checking my utility class again, this time against the valid domain, Grails domain object. Domains ID male, I expect to person to be male, this to be person. This is the simple name of the class person, and here to have the ID. Did I finish already? That was fast. It was like 25 minutes. Okay, I thought I don't have enough material. Okay. Any questions so far? We're good? Perfect. Okay, now let's climb another level. So let's clean it up here. We did the real unit testing, and we will mock. Now we'll stub a full service. This time I'm going to check my controller. My controller is the one that uses the service, that uses the utility class to build this tree. So this still is a unit test. Now I will test a controller as a unit, but I need stub for it. I need the service. So let's look at the identification controller spec. Okay, I need to go here, and that will be my third. Whoa, I have some problem with that. Yeah, okay. And by the way, I didn't run it, right? Let's run it and see that it works. Ooh, yeah. Again, this should work pretty fast. Although it has a mock, it doesn't actually create a database or something. It's just mocking some kind of fake ID for me. So that was fast. And now let's create a third. Yeah, so the thing is, I don't need the whole name. Okay, I'm good. Yep, yeah, I'm good. Okay, so this one is the stub controller class. Okay, so here I actually need two things. I still need a mock for my person, but I also need a stub for my controller. I need something that will behave as the service here. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is the first part. This is the setup of my test. Okay. So here I need to prepare the parameters that will come to my request from my web page, and my parameter will be person. This is what I entered in my input text box in my screen, and then I need to prepare the person object, which I'm going to save again to get the ID. Okay? And here I can prepare the stub of my controller. So I'm requesting a stub of the identification service. And then I say, when identified domains is called with the object person, this what should be returned, person with 1. I don't test my service here. I don't test my utility class here. I stub them. I go one level up on the controller, and I say, whatever the whole process is requested, just return me the correct answer. Right? This is stub. Hope you are familiar with this concept. If not, this is a very important concept in order to allow unit tests of high-level components, the components that depend on a lot of stuff. You don't want to test them all each and every time in your unit tests, and for that, you will need something like that. It's fairly a fairly simple concept, but you need to grab it. So now let's add the test itself. Here is the test. Okay, so what we have here is the test itself. So I'm saying when the controller performs identification, and this is the method that is called when someone clicks identify domain IDs, then I expect this controller to return me a JSON object when the result will be whatever I expect it to be, and this is what I expect it to be, right? So let's check it out. Yeah, here we go. We will have this map with the simple name that I asked here and the ID that I asked here. Right? So we tested a very high-level component. We tested the controller without actual dependency on any of the Grails infrastructure, which actually means this is a unit test, which also means it will run very, very fast if I remove the redundant curly bracket. Okay, again, I run it as a pure unit test without the Grails infrastructure behind. It will take more time because now it has the stubs and the JSON parser, but it's still very, very fast comparing to the test I'm going to show you next. Next, we are going to do infrastructure test. Infrastructure test means live Grails application in the air, which means I'm okay with 90 minutes. I have long-running stuff here. Okay. This one, good. Now let's talk about integration testing. I'm going to do the identification service spec as a test, and I will need to put it in my integration test source root here. It will be Groovy class, that will be the name, and integration class. Okay. Now here, look what's happening. I didn't annotate this test in any way. I didn't declare that this test needs Grails. But I can use injection of services here. And you can see that IntelliJ promises me that this service will be injected. What happened? How it knows that Grails should be involved? Just by putting this test class in the integration source root. Right? This is the convention that Grails promises to us. That the tests that are going to be in the integration source root will have Grails up and all the services injected. Okay, so that was the class. Now, let's do the test. So, this is the test that actually involves Grails. I create a new person, save here will actually do the save. This will be the real save. And I have a new spaceship with the same parameters here that we saw earlier. Okay? I'm adding the captain. Next will be calling to the service that I'm injecting here, identify domains with the spaceship, and I expect that the object I will get will have identify domain spaceship and this with the correct ID. And here we will have to go to subdomains. This is the tree, and find a person then with the correct ID. Okay? This is the integration test. We will add another integration test that checks that for non-domain objects, we will get an empty map. So let's check them as well. Here, I'm using another very powerful feature of Spock, which is unroll. You know what unroll does? If this method has more than one input, it will show as two separate test methods in my output and will allow me to identify which test failed in much more simple way. So here, I want to know that the ID of the object that isn't domain will actually be an empty map. So I expect the map of identified domains on object to be an empty map where the objects will be a list of two. First, I will just try to do it on a service, just to check that it fails. Okay, this is not a domain object. this is not a person, this is not a spaceship, it definitely will fail. And the other one with this just an object, which is also not a domain object, it doesn't have the ID, it's not a Grails domain object. So here, for both cases, I expect it to be empty map, and I unroll it to see two different results in order to see where the problem is if one of the tests misbehave. So now, when I will try to run this test, I need to run it as a Grails app. Otherwise, my injection won't work. Whoop. Error loading build config null. What did I do wrong? Something inside the build config. Oh. How do I do it? Build config. It's not a class. Yep. Oh, okay. Maybe I need parentheses. Remember Groovy Puzzlers? Whenever it didn't work, just add parentheses. Right? Okay. Let's try it now. That works each and every time. That's like magic. You add parentheses, everything works. This Lisp is genius, I'm telling you. I have time for coffee. Yeah, okay. So you can see here, this is our test. And although we only wrote 2 tests, we actually have 3 results here, right? ID domains with 1 level of nesting. This is the spaceship and the person. And then 2 domains which aren't the domain, 0 and 1. And this is the unroll for this list. Okay? So good so far? Good. Okay. Let's do that. Let's go back to our README and see what we have done. Okay. Now we are going up the next level. And the next level will be testing the UI. This will be the functional test. So there are a number of ways to test the UI. All of them are painful. Using Geb, Selenium, and Spock is the least painful of all ways. My colleague Eli here from JFrog, he's the head of the AQN release team. He's very experienced with Geb and Spock and Selenium, so he will probably be able to, if you have any questions about that stack, to ask him even better than me. I will show you the stuff that I prepared, but there is definitely much more into it. Let's see what should be done. So, first of all, let's start with the config. So, the thing is, I need prerequisites to run my functional tests. So, they're going into the functional source root. We need the Groovy class here, geb config, and yeah. So those are the prerequisites. Well, there are 2 reasonably useful web drivers that Selenium uses. One of them is Firefox, the other is Chrome. Out of those 2, the only really stable and useful is the Chrome one. The problem is Chrome WebDriver is barely unusable without Geb, because it has like awful API. So Geb is the layer on top, is the Groovy API on top the Selenium WebDriver. So you will need Chrome for that, and you will need a driver for that. Since I already 48 hours on my Mac, I know what Brew is, so I just installed the Chrome driver through Brew, and that's the reason it is located on my machine under this path. Of course, the path should be externalized, it should live in some kind of environment variable, but anyhow, you have to tell Jib where you have your driver, okay? And then you can just pass it with -d. You can use to convert it from environment variable, whatever. This is just for a test, so I hard-coded it here. You create a driver, you create a new maximized Windows, and return the driver instance. This is the needed setup, okay? Now we need to create some pages. Those pages will represent my actual pages in my tests. So I have two pages. I have my index page. Here in the functional, I'm going to create new Groovy class index page, and this is my index page. Let's look on it for a second. Yeah, so this is a gap page. It extends from the gap page, and there are a number of things that I need to tell Gab how to identify this page. Out of all the HTML pages that my WebDriver is going to render, what out of them is the index page? So the index page is one with the identification index path. It has title domain identification, and it has content of ID domain button, which should take to the other page that we don't have yet, and it should pass the input of the ID domain button. We will have a button. This will be its value. So we need to create the perform identification page. Let's see if IntelliJ can help me with that. Create class. Inside functional, and it looks good. Let's just see it was created in the right place. Yes. Okay, so that's the other page, and my test will just check that it was arrived to that page. So I need to check that the title is okay. Okay. Now let's write the spec. It will be Groovy class. It will be, no, it won't be under pages. It will be Groovy class. It will be under Grails, and that will be the name. Okay. What? Oh, no, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. That's the one I know. Okay, so I have a special specification. It's special in two aspects. Wow, that's very encouraging. It means we can end Anytime now. No, we still have some ground to go. The most interesting part is in front of us. So we have this identification spec. It's special in two ways. First, gap reporting spec. This is a special spec, special superclass for our JEB tests. And it has stepwise annotation. Stepwise annotation is usually not very, you're not very encouraged to use it because it means that you cannot parallelize this test. It should be performed one after another. But when we are talking about testing pages, that actually makes sense because you want your tests to be done one after another. You test this page, and from that you go to the next page, and then you test next page. So that's the reason why you will see a lot of stepwise tests, especially in the UI testing. What I need here is test the ID domain. So here, this is the first test. We are going to go to the index page. This is the setup. Get to the index page. It will be found by URL and will be checked by the title and everything. On the text page, enter the spaceship into the text field domain to ID. That's the text field we saw in our page. And then ID domain button, click, and ID domain, this is the convention of GEB. It will look for a button with ID domain, and perform a click on it on the page. And when the page is clicked, then go to perform identification page. Go to the other page. This is the first test. And now we will test our tree on the second page. So here I have my other test. Check the tree. Here we go. Now we are at the perform identification test because of the stepwise guy. Because of that, this was performed. So now we are on the another page, and we have our spaceship, which we are going to test. Spaceship has domain, has the person, and now we can start playing with the DOM. So we used JQ3 in order to build this nice tree, and that means that all the objects will have JQ3 IDs, and we are starting to play with that. Now, how can you even know this stuff? You just need to investigate the page, right? So you did this application, it was in the air, we saw it live. Now you just open the DOM browser and get all the IDs out of it, code it in your test, and rely on that it will keep your page tested when you make changes, right? No one expects you to know this stuff by heart before you're writing your tests. Okay? So that's the test. Now the question is, well, how that's supposed to work? I mean, I didn't initialize it with objects. I didn't have this setup part when I save person, save spaceship. But still, I send the spaceship to the check, and I expect a tree to be created and tested here. How that happens? That happens because of this guy. I have this bootstrap that I added to my application to initialize my dummy objects for that very reason, to be able to test them. JEB will actually fire a fully fledged Grails application. It will do everything. It will set up the database, it will run the bootstrap, it will populate the database, and it will take it there. We did the run up earlier, and we saw those objects. That's exactly what's going to happen now when I'm going to run my test. This is the functional testing. It tests live application. It's kind of cool because it actually fires up Chrome. So now let's run this guy. Okay, why did it do that? I don't know. I need to, yeah, I need to run that. Yeah. Okay, so now it will actually load Grails again and fire up Chrome. I will try to exit the presentation mode so we will be able, yeah, here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Saw it? It was kind of fast. Let's do it again. I like it. Chrome goes up. It wasn't that slow, was it? Yeah. Nice. All right? That makes sense until now? Okay. So now we are coming to the really interesting part. What we had now, what we saw now is the full Grails testable application. It's not a plugin, and that's a good thing because we could do all that. But it's also a bad thing because we only tested it in some special version of Grails as a standalone application. Will it even be packaged correctly? Will it even be loaded inside another Grail application is the question that we didn't even ask. And now it's the time to ask it. Now, what I'm trying to achieve here is kind of challenging. I need to be able to test how it will be installed in some application on any version of Grails, on any version of Groovy, any version of Java, and this must be automatic. So what JFrog and especially Noam Tene, the guy behind all this, came up with is a very neat trick in order to do it. He uses the GVM. What is GVM? Who knows what GVM stands for?
I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a system that allows you to, on the command line, just set all the properties, install Grails or
exactly. Version manager, environment.
It's just the V
in environment. Anyhow, it's yet another project that the Groovy community borrowed from the Ruby community when it's very popular, the RVM, right? The RVM, the Ruby environment manager. It's a very popular project in the Ruby world. Actually, it's a mandatory project for the Ruby world because Ruby has very strange feature. When you install Ruby on the system, this is the only Ruby you can use, period. So the development in multiple versions of Ruby is impossible without some dirty tricks. So Ruby Environment Manager plays with paths and symlinks to make the system think that it only has one version of Ruby, when actually you can switch between them. Okay, so in the JVM world, this is not the case. We are not that bad. So we can definitely have multiple versions of Java, multiple versions of Groovy, multiple versions of Grails. So here in our world, the GVM is just a commodity. It's just a convenient thing. It allows to download and to manage the versions, but it doesn't need to trick the system. Anyhow, it's very nice. It has this command line interface. I still have it running. Wow. Let's take it down. I can go like, it's a little bit slow, isn't it? Not slow, like a little bit small. Yeah, this is better. Okay, so this is the stuff I can do with JVM. I can go and install candidate. JVM install candidate. That's the list of candidates. Gradle, Grails, Griffon, Groovy, Lazybone, Spring Boot, Vertex, etc., etc. Okay? So all those stuff can be installed from JVM. By the way, Marco, which was present at least yesterday here in the conference, he's the guy behind JVM and definitely deserve your kudos if you still see him. Let's do a Grails, list Grails. This requires internet. Okay, we have it. So those are all the available Grails versions that can be installed with JVM. Asterisk means installed, and arrow means currently used. So I have only one Grails installed, and that is the currently used one. I can install any of them just by typing Grails install, JVM Grails install, and the version. Okay? This is how it works. It's super handy. You definitely should use it for your development. Now, what Noam said is, you know what, guys? That actually looks like a very good opportunity to be able to test the plugin on different Grails versions. So JVM is going to install those versions, and we'll be able to run them and test them. So what it came with was the project called SGVM. He's a very modest guy, Noam, so just called it Super Groovy Environment Manager. You know. Well, the thing with SGVM is that this is an API for the JVM written in Groovy. So we can script the commands for JVM. We can install from the code. We can switch to the version from the code. This is a very, very nice project. So this is what you need to do. You can do stuff like JVM, use Grails, install true, or use Grails, version, specific version that you want to use, install true. If this version is not installed, JVM is going to install it for you, make it the version of usage, and give you the path. This is like the Java IO path, like normal directory path. And from here, you can do whatever you like, right? So this is what it does. It has a bunch of other calls, right? Like install latest, etc., etc. You can also uninstall if you don't want to use them anymore. Okay? And you can say offline, and then, of course, the install won't be used. So that's the first part. Once we're able to automate the installation process, we can automate the testing of our plugin in that environment. So the next piece is creating an app that our environment, that our plugin will be installed in. Do anyone have any idea what we can use for that? We can use the scaffolding. Grails has this feature, scaffolding, right? We don't use it that much because it's kind of nice for demos. So I used it for my great UI. I used it for a couple of more demos, but that's mostly it. The thing is, it's very, very nice for testing the plugins because I can automate it. It's just a bunch of Grails commands that I issue, and I have an app. More so, I can customize it, the scaffolding. I can say, I want to create such and such domains. I want to create such and such services, such and such controllers, and then test my plugin not only on vanilla app, but on some kind of customized app. And that project called the Grails plugin wind tunnel. So this is black box testing infrastructure for Grails plugins. Let's look at the README. Okay, so here, well, when we started working on this talk, Noam came to me and said, let's do a talk about the wind tunnel, and say, okay, how do you think how long it will take? He said, I think it will be a lightning talk, 5 minutes, because this is all he has to say. So, install plugin on the local cache or deploy to the repository, create new test application, that's the dummy application we spoke about, configure the application to depend on the plugin, and run different test cases. This is what it does. It uses the SJVM to run any version of plugin that you want. How do you do it? You do it with the concept of a flight plan. Flight plan is a Groovy script which uses the wind tunnel DSL, and it says which Grails to use. I will show you. Let's write a flight plan. Okay, so I'll call it Grails 243. That happens to be the latest Grails, but it can be any Grails, of course, as we spoke. It can be any Grails. Here I have my flight plans directory. This is not a standard directory. Grails has no idea of its existence. It's just a directory that the convention that we invented for that. And I want a file there. It's called the Grails Groovy. It can be in any place. I give the absolute path to it, so it doesn't matter. And flight plan, here you go. Okay, that's the flight plan. Using Grails 243, test plugin. I want to test my testable plugin. That's the artifact ID. Version 0.1, and the repository I'm going to use is my local Maven repository, because that's where my plugin is installed. What we just wrote, we need to install it before we can test it. Okay, so it goes to userhome.m2 repository, and I want to run this test, the creation of the dummy application, the installation of the plugin, all the test and everything in temp directory. And of course, if you wish to examine the results, if you want to see how it ended up, etc., you might consider using non-temp directory. But for me, temp, it's fair enough. Okay? And once you have this test plan, we can actually see what's going on. So we need to Grails install. What did I do? That's not what I mentioned. Yeah. Back in search, install. Yeah, Grails Maven install, right? Okay. This is going to put my plugin into my local Maven repository, and that's exactly what I need to test it with my flight plan. Maven install complete, and here that's the command. Okay, Groovy plugins wind tunnel. That's the executable. I downloaded the zip file and unzipped it, and this is what I have. I have this executable, and I pointed project, Grail testable plugin, flight plans, that's the directory that we created, Grails, that's the flight plan. Let's try to run it, and it fails. Cool. What happened? Okay, I have something with the path here. Yeah. For some reason, I did it twice. How about now? Yeah, okay. So here we go. Using Grails version 243, that's the version that I asked, via JVM SDK, via SJVM. Running command, create app. I create the dummy app, and then install plugin, and then test app. So here we go. Next, run app. That's when it's going to run the application with my plugin installed. And that's actually the test that my plugin was created correctly, packaged correctly, and can be installed inside any other application. Running, compiling a random number of source files, and yeah, I have something with the Java launch helper. I have no idea what that even means. Server is up and running, and then exit. Why that happened? Because here is when the wind tunnel stops. Once the server is up, once the application got up completely, there are no exceptions. The plugin was installed correctly. This is where it stops. Okay? That's the scope. So this is it. This is what I wanted to show you. We have like 20 more minutes, which means plenty time for questions and or coffee. Thank you very much.